Well, hello everyone, and thanks so much for tuning in to the Celeste Stein Show today. We are so excited to be talking about a topic that unfortunately a lot of us don't like to talk about, but we need to, and that is grieving. The last year has really been transformational for many of us. Several have lost friends and loved ones as part of this process. Not being able to see loved ones in the hospital or at home in their final moments has really been devastating for many. In other cases, people could not even have a typical burial. So, how do we cope with some of these changes that have occurred due to the coronavirus, and where do we go from here? To help us with this, we are so fortunate to have with us a healing coach, life coach, author, and speaker known as Just Troya. Troya Butcher, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so thank you for having me this
Oh,
morning.
thanks for being on because like I said, this is a topic that a lot of us don't really like to talk about, and you sometimes often don't really talk about it until you're faced with it. And so the first thing I really wanted to get into with you is to have you tell your own story. What circumstances have brought you to want to help others with the grieving process?
Thank you. And so, I am, like we were speaking about earlier, I'm a daughter of a pastor. So death, I understood death. I sang at more funerals than I care to remember. But and so I understood what death is, and I'm also an ordained minister. However, in 2019, it was a significant year for me. Starting in December of 2018, my mentor passed away. Then February of 2019, my grandmother passed away. And then in July of 2019, my best friend passed away with an hour or so of us talking.
Wow.
So that was the first time that I understood that what grief looked like, or what grief was, because I understood my grandmom, understood my mentor, because both of them, my grandmother lived a long life. My mentor, she was sick for many years, but to talk to somebody and then an hour later they're gone, I didn't know how to grapple with that, and I was very angry, and I kind of retreated, and I knew something was wrong. I knew I was getting ready to spiral into this deep depression of the whys and whatnot. So it forced me to seek help. And when I went to look in the Christian community at churches and the like, there really wasn't anything or anyone addressing the grief. And what I realized is, and no offense to any other churches, I'm just saying, we do really well getting people to the repast. We pack up the food and we say, how can I help you? I mean, if you're here, if you need me, I'm here. But the truth of the matter is, after the door shuts, we really don't search after the people to see if they're doing okay. Um, and when I realized that, and I realized that I had to keep moving because I'm raising my grandchildren, I took myself to therapy, and we just began to work through, particularly the death of my best friend, but it was compounded by the loss of my grandmother and the loss of my mentor, all within a very short period of time. So I had this really wonderful therapist, and she talked me through everything. And then I realized that I'm a firm believer that we don't go through things for ourselves, and that we have to reach back and get someone. So I said, so that's what pushed me into this trajectory of working with those who are grieving. But I believe that I was always called to this work and I just didn't know it. A quick
Mhm.
backstory
Yeah.
behind my name: everyone thinks I'm named after my father, and I'm not. Troya is actually an Italian last name, and they found the name in Omaha, Nebraska, my parents, when they first got married. But I didn't come till 2 years later. And they would never tell me what my name came from, where my name came from. And I was at work one day and I was talking to somebody from Omaha, and he was like, yeah, Troya's funeral home. I was like, wait, what? I'm named after a funeral.
The backstories. Oh my goodness.
Right. So I'm like, I was named after a funeral home. Okay, that works. So Now, many years later, I realized that I was always called to this work. This was the thing that this is the path that I was supposed to be on. Um, and I'm honored that I'm helping people, because we don't normally, like I said, I'm sure people, like you said, we don't like talking about grief, and we don't like talking about the grieving process, especially in our community. But it's my hope that we begin to normalize what this grief thing is.
Yes. I kind of want to backtrack to something you said. You mentioned that, the church kind of stops after, the services and all of that is over. Do you think that has been a lot different or compounded due to COVID? Because I've noticed personally some huge differences not being able to actually set foot inside of a funeral home, to just be able to come knock on the door. And I had to drop something off at a funeral I went to earlier this year. It just seems like, I can't come in, like it just is very different. And so do you think, are you seeing, when you said that this doesn't, I guess, isn't a real reflection on, or a negative thing about the church. However, is it different is my question, since your family's been in ministry. I'm just curious, has it, has it been completely different than what it's been in the past?
It has, and I think each church and each situation is a little bit different, but the COVID has redefined the game, if you will. And some churches, my cousin, so last year, my cousin passed away, and that was the very first funeral that I went to. And because again, I'm the resident singer in the family, so so I'm the one that everybody calls. But when they could only have 75 people in the service, you had to be socially distanced, and it was very weird, because this particular cousin, had it not been COVID, the church would have been overflowing. And the way, and it's also different, because I think even though I say we stop at the repast is where a lot of people at that point began to comfort. The families are able to, the family members are able to comfort one another and comfort, whether we're eating and remembering, and that's been taken away. And then to be able to then, it was hard not to hug my cousins, and it was their mom who passed away, so it's hard not to hug my cousins. And my mom, they were very close to my mom, and my mom, this is pre-vaccine, so my mom wasn't able to. She kind of came in and left, because she's, with her being older, trying to make sure that she stays safe. And so that added to, and then you can't be, and then with the funeral homes, only certain number of people can be there, so you don't really have the support system. So what COVID has done, well, in the height of it, it removed those perceived support systems that you would normally have. And then the church, how do we navigate that? How do we open up? Do we open up? Do we allow? Because a lot of churches weren't even allowing people to come in. And then add to that, if the person died of COVID, some of them weren't even allowing an open casket. So it's been a very weird and hard time. But then I think a lot of funeral homes were forced to pivot, and just like churches have been forced to pivot and enter and step into technology where there was none, and opening it up to having streaming services that helped. It I don't think it cured it, but it helped a lot, because now at least you get to see the service if you can't be there with the persons.
Right. So those are little things, but yeah, they help. Right. And you mentioned that you also, to help with your own grieving process, that you did see a counselor. Now, I know a lot of folks in the African American community kind of frown on actually going to get help, but it has been really different. And I wanted to ask you, how did that process come about? Did someone approach you, or did you just say, "Hey, I really think I need to see someone"? Like I'm just, how do you get to that step, that important step, shall we say?
Yes. Well, like I said, when I was driving home, because my friend, we had his service was in Arkansas, and we actually drove out there because I was, I had nothing better to do with my time except for drive to Arkansas. But when I came back, I knew then that I was having issues because many people are familiar or may not be familiar with. There's this process called the five steps of grief. And the step that I stayed in, if there was a step, was anger. And I was very, very angry. I was angry at God. I was angry at my friend for leaving, because I'm like, both of y'all knew he was leaving and no one consulted me. I would have told y'all to stay here. Told him to stay here. But what happened when I got home, the anger began to consume me, and I couldn't function at work. I was the smallest thing, I will burst out in tears trying to work from home, and and then, like I said, I had my grandchild, and I was on autopilot. I was just moving and I wasn't dealing. And the smallest things would set me off, and I said, you know what, this isn't going to work. I didn't want to get out of bed. And I just finally said to myself, I need to go talk to somebody. But I'm also a proponent of counseling and going to help get services, if you will, because of the fact when I was in the military, we had to make sure that you're okay. And I've dispelled that myth that we're weak because we're going to get help.
Right. That's awesome, because, a lot of people need to hear that. And it's nothing wrong with that, that's how you kind of get to your next steps. So
it doesn't make you weak.
Right. Exactly right. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to get into those steps that you alluded to about the 5 steps of grieving. We can talk about that when we come back from this break. And so we'll be right back right after this.
A lot of things have come to a screeching halt due to COVID-19, but you should know that the court system in Tennessee is still open and holding in-person hearings for orders of protection and other types of abuse cases. If you have a hearing date, double check on where your hearing will be held. If you need assistance on an order of protection or temporary restraining order, contact the Legal Aid Society at 1-800-238-1443 or visit our website at www.las.org.
And we are back in the studio with Toya Butcher. We're talking about grieving today, and we are going to talk a little bit about the grieving process. I wanted to ask you, is it okay to not be okay, and what does that mean? Toya?
Absolutely. That's one thing that I have said and continue to say from once I became okay, if you will, after talking through my therapist, because she said to me, she said, Troya, you don't have to be okay today. I'm like, yes, I do. I have to take care of this. I got to do this. I got to do this. She said, no, you don't. And it's okay to be broken. And I said this before, everybody wants you to be strong, because it's not about you, it's about them being comfortable with you not breaking. And so to let it all fall, to just stop trying to juggle it all and just letting it break. And it's okay to say, I'm just not having a good day today. I'm having a moment. My best friend is gone. My grandmama is gone. I can't talk to these people anymore. It hurts. I don't like it. I'll be better tomorrow, but right now I need my 10, 15 minutes just to get it out, because if I don't and I continue to stuff it in, it's going to come out much worse than what it should if I do it right now.
Right. So a minute ago, you mentioned there are kind of 5 steps of the grieving process. I want to kind of run through what those are. And then have you kind of talk about, like you said, you kind of got stuck on anger, getting stuck and how we move to the next level. So tell me about the 5 steps of the grieving process.
So there's this lovely lady many, 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 many moons ago, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She created these 5 steps, and she was really dealing with people who were in hospice care and things of that nature, and were terminally ill. And her 5 steps were denial, anger, bargaining, and acceptance. The first, and that it even though it started out because of where she was working. I mean, her study of work, it can actually translate into a lot of different losses. Because the one thing that we say, grief is the loss of a person, place, or thing that you're emotionally attached to. So it doesn't matter if it's a physical death or the loss of COVID freedoms, right? So the first step is denial. You don't believe it happened, then you get angry. Or if it's a terminal illness, you're bargaining, God, don't let this happen. All of that, then you fall into the depression, and then at some point you get to the acceptance of the loss. So that is how that's the steps, if you will. And Ms. Kubler-Ross's mentee, Dave Kessler, he actually wrote a book because it doesn't stop at the acceptance. Now it's how do you live on? How do you live through your loss? So he wrote the meaning of death, or the meaning of grief, I think it is. And so there's a 6th step now, which is moving on. How do you go through it? And the reason, and it's not a linear, I'm denying, I'm angry, except it's not. You go back and forth. You can go back and forth. With me, with my best friend, none of those steps mattered because I couldn't bargain. I didn't know. I couldn't deny because it happened. I couldn't. So then depression and acceptance, I wasn't even thinking about those. So the one that felt the coat that felt really good to me was anger. And the living on part, that wasn't even a part of the discussion. But again, for me, I had to think when I thought about staying in the anger, what does that look like? I had other things going on. Like, again, I keep mentioning my grandchildren. I had to raise my grandchildren. But then I thought about all those who have passed on. Would they want me to live this existence? How would he feel if I'm sitting here angry at God and him because of him dying, him passing away? And so when I thought about all of our conversations, particularly him, he would say, I would hear him in my head, "Troy, for real, that's what you're doing? You really?" And I'm like, but John, for real. And if you don't get your behind up, and that's what he would say. And I was like, but I don't want to. It doesn't matter. Get up. And so I began to crawl out, and I had to figure out what works for me. And so I began to write. I just began to write out everything that I was feeling, and it ended up being a letter to him. And I poured out everything that I was feeling to him in this letter, and I began to feel better. So I think it's important to acknowledge where you are. And somebody said, you can't be angry with God. You absolutely can be angry with God, because he tells us it's okay to be angry, but don't sin not, but sin not. And his shoulders are big enough to handle whatever we're going through. Because my thing was, I said, God, I'm not talking to you. I'm not talking to John. I'm not talking to anybody. Okay, but I'm not going to go anywhere. So once I realized that, and I said, okay, Trey, get up. You have work to do. And I began to turn all of that pain into power, and my tragedy into a triumph, whatever that looked like. So that's how I was able to move.
Yeah, well, that brings me to my next question. A nice segue into that. We obviously know people grieve a little bit differently. Each of us is different. And so, like you said, we're not going to go through all those steps in the same way or in the same order. It's not linear.
Right.
But when you're counseling or talking to people, what do you now say to those people who can't seem to get beyond one of the steps, like you couldn't, like anger? What do you, when you reach out to those individuals, what, do you say, and what would you recommend others, friends and family who want to help that person? What would they say, or should they say?
Well, there's two things. Well, for me, again, I'm a minister, so I've been at funerals, so I've completely changed my language about because everyone says that universal, to be absent with the body is be present with the Lord. That's all good and true, but at that moment, that's not what they want to hear.
Sure.
They want to hear whoever it is, my loved one is gone. I don't like it. It sucks. So what I say to people now is feel everything that you're feeling. It's okay. Again, you're not Humpty Dumpty. All the king's horses and all the king's men are not going to come to put you back together again. But what I would say to people is to give them grace, allow them grace to go through this process. Because again, a person who has been married for 31, 30, 40, 50 years and their spouse is gone, you're expecting them to be okay in 2 days, and they're not. And then there's the presence of silence. And if you do nothing else, don't expect. I think we expect people to come to them and say, I'm broken, when we already know that they're broken, right? So instead of waiting on that person, it's very easy. You can say to them and mean it. Listen, I know what you're going through. It's hard, but I'm here. If you just need to pick up the phone, scream, and hang up, I won't be offended. And that's what I tell most people. I said, listen, if you don't say another word, or if you can't do anything, pick up the phone, call me, cuss me out. I know it's not personal, and then hang up. Or just go in the room and scream. Whatever you're feeling in that moment, let them do it. And from people, when you're dealing with someone like that, if you're trying to ask what's going on, they may not be able to tell you, and just say that I'm here. And I think that's the ministry of silence, and just the presence is huge. And then just saying, I'm here for whatever you need, and allow them to express it in the way that they need to, because it's different. Like I said, I was in a summit a couple of weeks ago, and Dave Kessler said, and I borrowed, so I'm borrowing this. Grief is as different as our fingerprint. So it's not going to be the same, and we have to understand that grief is never, you never get over the grief, because there's always going to be something that's going to remind you of the person, but you can begin to live through it. And allowing the person to get it out, that's the most important thing, is to allow them to get it out. And don't be offended by the emotion, and just know that that's just where they are. They're trying to come to grips with something that is so traumatic to them.
Right. Well, as you say that, Toya, are there danger zones that we might be getting into with someone, where, say, they may be in real trouble? Maybe they're not eating or not sleeping. When those types of things start to happen, what are the recommendations there? Because they may be very different from someone who's going through a normal grieving process, correct?
It is, and because there's complicated and uncomplicated grief. The normal uncomplicated grief, people are continuing to move forward their life, but then there's some people that are just stuck. And we see that a lot in our community. We don't recognize it, or we don't label it as a grieving process. We label it as somebody is special, they have issues, and instead of recognizing that their grief has now turned into a mental health issue, which is depression. And when we see somebody that before the death, and a year in, 2 years in, everything looks different. There's some issues there. But even in the first couple of weeks, the first month or so, that's normal for somebody because they're still just trying to grapple with everything and wrestle with everything. But I think as we get into that 2, 3, 4 month period, if the person isn't eating, if the person isn't practicing personal hygiene, if the
Right.
person is letting everything just go, then yeah, there's some intervention at that point that needs to happen. And again, because now it's moving into the realm of depression,
Mm-hmm.
and and a lot of it is unresolved loss because we're not dealing with the loss and we can't deal with the loss. So at that point, yeah, it would be good to start having those conversations of this is harder than what the normal grief. And there was a story, it broke my heart. A young man lost his grandmother, and he felt like there was no one else in the world that loved him. And he weeks later he took his own life.
Mm.
So we want to and that I didn't know the young man. Somebody told me the story and it broke my heart. And those are the kind of things you want to start having a conversation about. You want to start listening to people
Yes,
um,
absolutely.
when they want to say, I want to be with this person. I should have been. And you want to be very, very, when you see and they have not broken and they have not snapped out of it, or and when I say snap out of it, they're just stuck in that perpetual state of law from the day of that loss. They haven't started moving forward. Then you want to start listening to those thoughts and those conversations.
Yeah, it can be so difficult. And
Hmm.
I've seen, it seems like more people have passed on in the last year than I can remember in my entire
Hmm.
lifetime. I've had three, coworkers that have lost immediate family members, whole families.
Right.
It's just totally different. And, I find myself feeling, sad and uncomfortable about, what do I say to this person? It's
Hmm.
like it's not an easy thing,
It's
but
not.
you want to be there for people and let them know it's okay, as we said earlier, not to be okay, and that
Right.
we can certainly be there to lend support. Sometimes I'll just tell someone, I'm here if you need me. If don't if you need to call me,
Right.
and we can talk. And then, obviously in the initial stages, you kind of give that person time to
Hmm.
grieve and to go through the process. When we come back, we're going to take a quick break here, and I want to talk a little bit about spirituality and
Okay.
religion, and what role that perhaps plays in the grieving process. So we'll talk about that right after this quick PSA we're going to hear from in just a moment.
When it comes to relationships, there are some obvious signs you can use to spot someone who might be abusive. First, they have a tendency to want to rush into a relationship. They may also show signs of jealousy and mistrust, and you could find they expect you to be perfect and will try to cut you off from other important relationships. They could also be abusive towards animals and children. To learn more about the signs of dangerous individuals and how you can identify and avoid unhealthy relationships, contact the Legal Aid Society at 1-800-238-1443.
And we are back in the studio here, live remoting in from various locations, right? To talk about the grieving process. And I wanted to get into the next question. As we said, we want to talk a little bit about the role that spirituality and religion and the church plays in the grieving process. Do you think it should be more than it is?
I believe that if we're going to minister to people holistically, and we're treating the whole person, we have to understand that death is a part of life, and we sometimes forget that we all live to die. I mean, I know we don't like to hear that, but we're
Mm,
born to die. And
yes.
and if we want to talk, we don't want, and everyone says, they joke, well, we all owe God a death. we do, and we talk about this eternal life, but we don't talk about the death. And so I think it's very important now. Again, I'm a minister. I never thought about it in that way, but I believe it's important that we begin to talk to people to prepare them for what death looks like. And if we think about it, Christ has already told us. He gave us a roadmap. He had this whole conversation with his disciples before he left. He said, listen, I'm going away to prepare this place for you, which means our physical relationship is no longer going to be here. We talk about everything but the death because it's uncomfortable. And again, we need to begin to normalize it. So yes, in the Christian community, I can't speak for any other religions, but in the Christian community, we need to be able to be honest and open with this whole conversation, this whole idea of what death looks like. If we're telling our parishioners that there's we have eternal life, okay, the only way to get eternal life is through death. So why are we missing this huge step? There's this thing you have to do to get to this eternal, this mansion in the sky, and that is close your eyes and give up the ghost. So I think spirituality and no one, I don't know why we don't do that. I really don't know why we don't, but we should, because then it's still going to hurt, which is why Christ said, I'm sending the comforter to comfort you during those times. Because he understood that the relationship separation is going to be hard, which is why he purposely did that. But we need to talk about it some more. We need and then understand that after the death, people need the church. That's when they need the church to rally around them the most. Not just at the funeral, but later. There need to be a way to come in and scream and yell and cry and get it all out, so that they can begin to heal, and that they're not stuck in their grief.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the best coping strategies that you would recommend? You mentioned some very good ones earlier, but I'm sure, like we said, everybody's different. Are there some other coping tactics that you might recommend to people, to recommend to someone who might be going through the grieving process, or to that person specifically? What are some of the things that you might say to that person?
So recently, I got a phone call of someone who was they were losing it, and they were in the car driving, but they pulled over, and they were losing it. They could not. I mean, they were in the throes of a grief moment, and I let them get it out, and then I said, stop, breathe, and they're like, what? Breathe, and I need you to. And that's it. And I purposely made them breathe through their nose and out through their mouth, breathe through their nose and out through their mouth. And then I began to have them say to themselves, I'm okay. I can do this. I'm okay. And I think it's important when you're having those moments, if it's really intense, it's get it out. Because one of our mantras is the healing journey begins when you let it out, because you don't want to keep it in. So if it's a scream, then cool. But again, kind of center yourself and just breathe, and then write it out. Write something out. Go take a walk. Change. Who is it? And Yala Van Zandt coined the phrase "interrupt the process." If you're in the house where you and your spouse spend all of your time together, or your child's room, or break up the process and leave. Step out and breathe some fresh air. It's the springtime now. Come out. I mean, all those things that you have to do, like if it's particular, like if you've lost somebody and you have to, process death certificates and all that stuff that comes with death. Leave it for a moment. You don't have to do everything today. Rome wasn't built in a day, and it'll hold till tomorrow. You don't have to get rid of all the clothes today. If you have time at work, just take your time and go back to work. But just do what I like to call it when I'm working with clients, a head and a heart check. Where's your head now, and how's your heart feeling? If either one of those are out of alignment, which they are when it comes to grieving, stop. Give yourself 15 minutes. It's okay. 15 minutes is not going to make or break anything. But it will help you to move forward. It will help you to kind of calm the noise, if you will. And if that doesn't help, call somebody that you know will listen. And be careful who you invite into your grieving process.
Sure, absolutely. That's so important. That's like with every and anything,
Right.
But you're a little more vulnerable, I think, when you're grieving.
Right.
And so it's important to point that out, try to be alert, and, those people that you care about that might be going through that process.
Right.
You might have to help and keep an eye out for, everything from scammers to, people who just do not have one's best interests at heart.
Exactly.
As you were mentioning that, I was thinking, I just don't have any idea how people coped with everything that was going on during COVID. I know people, I have people in my family, I won't call any names, but did not leave the house for a good 8 months. Okay. I mean,
right.
So, I don't have a clue as to how you could get away from, I don't know. What did you face that with anybody? Dealing with anybody who was just at home? And
my parents. My parents. So my parents are older, and as parents, I mean, not that they have huge health issues, but they had health issues, so they didn't go anywhere. And my 13-year-old nephew lives with them, so he didn't go anywhere. So, and then and I have custody of my 4 of my grandchildren, because again, God has jokes, but.
God has jokes. Just when you thought you were done, right? No.
Right. I was like, okay. So what would happen, and then a good girlfriend of mine, she was an essential worker, and she had 2 school-aged children. So what I would do, I would go pick her children up, and then I was very careful. I went into the store. I was masked up, drop everything off, come out the house. But they had we had bleach wipes, not Clorox wipes. And so we made sure, between my sister and I, we made sure that our parents are okay, because they just did not want to come out, rightfully so. But it was interesting. And I know of another man who, a very, very sweet gentleman, he still hasn't come out. He came out to get the vaccines, and he's still not allowing people to come in until July. But what I think it forced people to, I don't know. I don't know. It was just weird. Get along with each other. But then then the scary part of it was, the flip side, the commercial that you just said, some people were locked in with their abusers. Right. So that's scarier too. And yeah, it was, you had to be more aware of people, and checking on people now on the phone, and video conferencing, and checking and making sure that everybody was okay, because of this was so unprecedented.
Now, I know, there might be times where you really want to help somebody, especially somebody might be worried about who is going through the grieving process. What are some great questions that maybe you can ask in a very tactful way that might basically let us know, where they're at, so that, if they need help, we can come up with ways to help them in intervention,
Yeah. One, I mean, I guess in COVID, I mean, I think when you're talking to somebody, you can kind of hear, I think, if you're being very mindful. But the one thing that we want to ask is, Did you eat today? Did you brush your teeth? Did you change your clothes? Did you go grocery shopping?
Yeah.
Where, or most importantly, where are you right now?
Hmm.
Are you still in the bed?
Right.
Are you in the room? Did you get out? Because I mean, when for me, it was just that intentional when I was going through my grieving process. The fact that I sat up in my bed and because I have a chair right next to my bed, I actually got up out the bed and sat on the chair. That was huge for me because all I wanted to do was sleep.
Hmm.
Um, and it could be just that simple. Uh, did you get out the bed today? Did you did you put your feet on the ground? Did you put your feet on the ground? Did you feel something other than just laying there prostrate?
Hmm.
Um, where are you in the? You sound angry. You sound. Are you? I mean, all these different. You can ask. Those are different kind of questions that you can ask, and you may get a response. You may not get a response. Um, or the other part is if you have not heard from the person at all in a few
Hmm.
days, it's very important then to reach out to them to see where
Yeah.
they are.
Yeah, and that's the thing, people they are uncomfortable with the process sometimes, so they may take a step back because they don't know what to say or don't know
Right.
what to do. But we probably should not do that. We need to really, like they did in the old days, check on people, see how
Mm-hmm.
they're doing, and that kind of thing.
And it's okay to be
So,
nosy
oh yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. Get in there and find out what's going on, right?
Right.
Exactly. So in being sensitive, what do you think are some things that might trigger a grief reaction in people?
It's different for every person. And I think it's also the type of loss, who the person was to that person. Like I said, I recently had a conversation with somebody, and for them, their trigger was the first of a lot of things. The first time they went out to eat by themselves without the person that passed away. For me, I was driving down the street a few months ago, and I was having a good day. There was nothing wrong. An 18-wheeler pulled up beside me, and I lost it because my best friend was a truck driver, and I was
Hmm.
like, really? And like I was like, oh, why am I crying? But that was a trigger, and we have to understand that those are considered what's considered. There's a term for it. It's called a grief burst, and
Hmm.
it'll come out of nowhere. You could think you're okay, but again, holidays and now mothers, the people that in COVID who have lost their mother through COVID, Mother's Day was very hard because that was the first time you were without mom. Father's Day is getting ready to come up. It could be something as small as the Isley Brothers came on the radio, and they had a moment. And it's like, but that was his favorite song. That was her favorite song. Um, Making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So it's different for every person. And when that happens, if you're around a person like that and you see them starting to get emotional behind something that you feel is very small, I would again consider that that's a trigger for them,
Hmm.
that there was something that was going on with them, and just ask, are you okay? And they may tell you, because now we're making it normal.
Hmm.
We're that this person, oh yeah, I forgot they just lost somebody a few months ago.
Hmm.
They lost somebody a year ago. They maybe, and last year around, so my best friend died in July, and something happened in my life, and I was like, what happened? Why I was so, it was a cloud. I was like, and then I realized, oh, it was the anniversary of his death.
Hmm.
And I was like, and I didn't make good decision. I didn't make a good decision about something then. And I was like, why not? And I said, my brain wasn't there. So the 1 year anniversary. So a lot of stuff can lead to persons being having a trigger. But as we begin to heal, it won't be as intense the next time it happens.
Hmm. We're going to take another break right now. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about children and grief. Totally likely different, and we want to just discuss that a little bit with you. We'll be back right after this.
Domestic violence between intimate partners is expected to rise by 20% during and coming out of the quarantine shutdown. There are steps you can take to protect yourself. Don't wait for an abuser to hurt you. Call the police if you feel threatened. If your abuser begins to stalk you, it might be time for an order of protection. Once you get it, carry it with you and show it to police if you must call them. For more information, call the Legal Aid Society at 1-800-238-1443.
Hello, and welcome back to the Celeste Stein Show. Thanks for joining us today. And today we are talking about grief. And I wanted to get into children and the grieving process. Do you think children should be allowed to go to the funeral of a parent or grandparent, at this particular time in light of COVID? What do you think is going on right now with that?
I believe that to raise healthy adults, you need to raise healthy children. Need to be healthy and learn and understand the whole process. And the only reason I say that is because my granddaughter was very close with my grandmother, who was her great great grandmother. Mm-hmm. So she was there at the service. Her and my oldest grandson, they both came to the service so that they understood that grandmom wasn't what we called her grand, was no longer coming back. But again, I would defer to a parent to have that conversation, but adults don't want to have the conversation. So then trying to help a child through it when an adult doesn't want to do it. So again, it goes back to, we need to normalize this thing called death and understand that it happens, and
Right.
that however you tell your child that a loved one has passed on, whatever conversation you have, but there needs to be one that, and there's several books, and if you can't find the words, there's a lot of books that you can use to explain what's going on. The one we use for my grandchildren. Now the title slipped my head, but it talks about going to heaven, and that the person did pass away, and this would look like, and because this is void now, and it's unfair of the child not to know what's going on, and then again, that can be their first loss. I remember my first loss was my grandmother, my father's mother. I was 4, because I remember it because I remember she got sick. They took her to the hospital, and I remember my father picking me up to look into the casket. I didn't get it, but I understood. I mean, at 4, I didn't process it as she had died, but I still knew that she was not there because I thought she was asleep, but I knew she was not. Fundamentally, I knew that she wasn't there, but I at least got to say goodbye.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Yeah.
Right. And I was.
Mm-hmm. One thing that kind of reminded me about my grandmother's funeral, I was not allowed to go. I was like 14, but we weren't allowed to go. I have 2 siblings. We weren't allowed to go to that one, but I was in college when my grandfather passed away, and that was the first time that I lost somebody really close to me. Mm-hmm. And we were at the funeral, and I remember, as people were coming around, we were kind of standing like in a line, and people were coming back through. And my brother is kind of a funny guy. He kind of says what's on his mind. I'm more quiet and introverted by nature, but as people came by, somebody made a comment. It's like, well, you should be very happy that your grandfather was able to live a very long life, and started saying all this stuff. And after the person passed on, moved down the line, my brother said, that person doesn't even know me or know anything about, like, it's like, it was weird because what you'll find is people don't know what to say.
They don't.
They really don't know what to say. And so I don't know. It's like, when in doubt, maybe leave it out.
Right.
Yeah, let's just
There's
all
no
just
need to
kind of.
talk.
That's what you think sometimes, you know.
Like,
But
and I'm not, and I'm like your brother. I don't, and people tell me all the time, my face tells everything.
yeah,
And I'm like, did y'all just say that for real? And I'm
right,
like, and you're constantly telling yourself, fix your face, Troy, fix your face, Troy.
right. Yeah, there are people who are definitely like that. I'm
Yeah.
able to conceal mine very well, but
It's
I'm
written.
around people all day, every day that it's all in the face, you know, all in the expression. So you have to, I mean, just realize people are human too. People are
Right.
people, and it's going to happen that someone might say something awkward or uncomfortable. But I think that, um, you know, there is the point in the fact that certainly people might need assistance.
Hmm.
We might not always know what to say or how to say it, but you know, there are times that people might need to see a grief counselor or somebody to talk about what's going on. How would you say are some good ways to look for someone in your area that you might be able to consult with?
I think so. If you go to there's a website. It's called grief.com. I mentioned Dave Kessler. He's an amazing man. He has an actual directory of grief counselors all over the country, and I venture to say internationally, but Dave Kessler, he is the beyond. There's several others, but he's the most renowned person that works in grief support, and he has everyone that has gone through his course that have that are grief support people. He's one of them. Um, you can also go to a therapist. You can go to your own another therapist locally. If you didn't want to go through the grief.com, I would say reach out to your local psychotherapy, psychiatrists, the whole that whole mental health field. Um, but if you wanted someone who specifically works with those who are grieving, then yes, grief.com is a good one. Um, and hopefully people and a lot more people are starting to understand COVID. That's the one thing that COVID has exposed, is this whole notion of grief. It's
Mhm.
been there. It's not going anywhere. But COVID has exposed that. Wait, we've all lost something. And what am I feeling? I'm not understanding what this feeling is. It's grief.
Mm.
And
Yes, that's true.
yeah,
That's
and
something we don't really think about, but it has really been an interesting time, hasn't it?
it has. It
Yeah.
has, and it had, and something that, and again, I mean, not that I think Dave Kessler is great, and I borrow a lot of his things. So one day, hopefully, I'll meet him. Um, so, he said, grief has to be seen. Grief, in order for it to heal like anything else, grief has to be exposed, and COVID has definitely been exposing grief. And I read an article a couple of days ago. It said, "What's the next wave of the pandemic? The next thing that happens after the pandemic is dealing with grief, especially those who are on the front lines, right? Because they have been." They've seen it. They've seen their patients die within hours. And at some point, the frontline workers and the essential workers are all going, because they have been risking their lives doing the things that
Right.
we have not had to do. I was able to stay at home. My parents were able to stay at home. Others were able to stay at home. They had to actually get up and go into the hospital, and and no one talks about it, but a lot of them, when COVID first happened, some traveling nurses, they had to find somewhere to live. Places that they were supposed to stay, people were afraid of them because they didn't want them to live with them. So now landlords were revoking. So now not only you have to go to work and your patients are dying, now you don't have a safe place of your own and trying to keep your family safe. So
Just crazy. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
craziness.
it was weird around here. Two of us were, well, one is a first responder and the other working, you know, in the hospital clinic setting. And it was like nobody knew what was going on. You know, we had to like
Hmm.
get a handle on it really quickly
Right.
and start doing all the things that, you know, you need to do, taking it very seriously. Now, I know we don't have much time left, but I think I read that you had a grief kit that you created.
I do have a grief kit. So my grief kit, because again, our theory is the magic that happens when you the healing journey begins when you let it all out. So when I began this process and started working with people, the first thing I wrote was my book, Soul Ties, Letters of Love. And then as I kept going, I was like, well, what does that look like? How do we work? So I began to create a kit. So we have a journal that's like a 220-page journal, a pillow, tumbler, and in a little bag to put everything in. Why did I do that? Because again, if I borrow Inyala's process, we need to interrupt the process and getting everything out. So with the journal, of course, you can write everything in the journal, write it out. With the tumbler forces you to go get something to drink.
Right.
It forces you to stop.
Right. That's great. I mean, you know, it's so important to have those things. That's what a great idea. I know we're almost out of time here. I wanted to be able to say thank you so much for joining us today. And, you know, I think this has been great. You guys can reach out to me, and if you want to get more information on our guests that joined us today, you can certainly visit my website, bsaPRinc.com. Again, that's bsaPRinc.com. We'd love to hear from you. I thank you all for listening. And remember, in all you're getting today, don't forget to gain wisdom and understanding. I'm your host, Dr. Celeste Stein. Thanks for joining us.